Chapter 196. Kevin Kyle looked in the direction of Karen's finger but still did not see anything. Finally, he shook his head helplessly. What's wrong with him recently? Even when he saw an ordinary heart-shaped Band-Aid and heard Karen's childish words, he could only think of Karen daily. Dad, I'm hungry. I want to eat strawberries and chocolate. Karen raised her small hand to hold her father's face and said in a sweet voice. Very soon, little Karen couldn't remember what Big Karen had done for her earlier. She was focused on eating delicious food. Do you want to eat it now? Looking at his daughter's blinking big eyes, Kevin Kyle lowered his head and kissed her red face. $500 for a kiss. Little Karen spread out her hands and said softly, Daddy will need to pay for it. Kevin Kyle said, But do you want money or strawberry? Hearing her father's words, she tilted her little head and blinked her beautiful big eyes. She was seriously thinking about it. She wanted money and wanted strawberry too. How could she choose? After some thoughts, little Karen raised her little hand and made a gesture of two. She said softly, Dad, I want both of them. Kevin Kyle shook his head. No, you can only choose one. Being rejected by her father, little Karen felt sad. She threw her head into her father's arms and said, Dad, I need money and strawberries. Kevin Kyle was worried that he would make his daughter cry, so he quickly raised his hand and surrendered. Okay, you'll get the both of them. Daddy's the best. Karen got up and looked up at her father's face and gave him a kiss. $1,000, Daddy. Your kiss costs $1,000 now? Kevin Kyle picked Karen up and kissed her little face several times, and then he said, Well, how much should I give you now? Karen counted with her little fingers and said seriously, 1, 2, 3, one more, 2. She counted with her fingers several times, but no matter how hard she counted, she couldn't figure out how much money her father should give her. She had a deal with her father. If she kissed him, her father would give her $1,000. If her father kissed her, he would give her $500. And if he pinched her face, he would give her $100. And there were a lot of promises between her father and her. She really couldn't remember so many things at once. $1,000. Karen counted with her fingers for a long time and finally came up with such an answer. She looked at her father and smiled very proudly as if to say to him, Daddy, you better praise me. I've counted it correctly. Okay, but remember that I owe you so much and I will give you back in the future. Kevin Kyle held Karen with one hand and picked her up from the ground with the other. Karen, Momo, let's go home. Karen leaned into her father's ear and said, Dad, and there are sister's $1,000 too. Kevin Kyle smiled and said, Well, okay, whatever you say, it's up to you. The bodyguards and nannies behind them saw the father-daughter duo. No, it should be the father and his daughters, 3 of them. In their master's eyes, the pet dog, who was born almost the same time as little Karen, was also his daughter. Now in Kyle's family, the most precious thing was their young lady, Karen Joy Kyle, and the next one was the dog, who grew up with the young lady. Nobody dares to provoke the young lady and the puppy. The whole family looked after them like gems. After Karen Daly had an accident 3 years ago, Kevin Kyle replaced all the workers in his house in Secret Garden. Besides replacing the helpers who worked in Kyle's family for decades, he replaced the nanny who took care of little Karen too. He personally chose this new nanny. Now the bodyguards who protected little Karen were all Kevin Kyle's men who followed him when he was in the United States. He replaced all the people around him with the ones he trusted the most, and he didn't need anyone else. Little Karen has already 3 years old and had been practicing taekwondo for a few months. Kevin Kyle had invited the best taekwondo coach to teach her at home. Every day when he got off work and went home, he would certainly accompany little Karen to practice for an hour. No matter what Karen did, he would accompany her patiently. When little Karen's mother could come back one day, he could tell her every detail of little Karen's growth to her. He'll tell her that their child was good, but she only needed her mother to come back to her side. After changing into a white taekwondo suit, Karen gently kicked him twice. Kevin Kyle clapped his hands and encouraged her. That's great. Being praised by her father, Karen became more serious when she learned from the coach. Although her arms and legs were small, her every move was really like that of a little warrior. After finishing her class, she suddenly threw herself into her father's arms and gulped down a few mouthfuls of water while holding the bottle. Dad, I'll protect you and sister in the future. Well, good girl. Kevin Kyle took a towel to wipe the sweat on her head. Looking at her face, he couldn't stop thinking of his wife, whom his daughter looked like. If Karen Daly was with them, what would she do with their daughter? President Kyle, I'll go first, said the young male coach. Yes. Kevin Kyle nodded. Teacher, goodbye. Little Karen waved at the coach and said softly, Goodbye. The coach also waved to her. It was a kind of enjoyment to teach such a lovely and beautiful child. Dad, I'm hungry. Kevin Kyle looked at the time. As he was careless, it was already past little Karen's mealtime. No wonder the little girl was starving. He picked her up and said, Let's go for dinner. Dad, can I have a big brother? Every day she could only play with her sister. She felt so bored, and it would be good if there was another brother to play with them. Why do you want a brother? As long as his daughter was happy, he could consider adopting a child to grow up with her. Little Karen pinched his fingers and said in a soft voice, I want a lot of brothers and sisters, but I only need one dad. Kevin Kyle understood that little Karen wants brothers and sisters because she was too lonely and wanted someone to play with her. That night, after coaxing little Karen to sleep, Kevin Kyle was thinking about this question. After thinking about it for a while, he decided to send little Karen to a kindergarten in the military area of Chatterton Town. The security there was much better than the so-called expensive kindergartens outside. 3 years ago, he had lost his wife, Karen Daly. He couldn't afford to lose his daughter again. Karen. Looking at little Karen's quiet sleeping face, Kevin Kyle called her name softly. He didn't know whether he was calling for Karen Joy Kyle, his daughter, or Karen Daly, his wife. Chapter 197. The MIWA fashion show was world-class. After the event, not only will the models' values soar, but the designers behind the scenes would also receive a lot more attention. Although the possibility of the designers being recognized by the audience was not as high as that of models, their status would be significantly elevated in the industry. Those who could win awards will definitely be the talk of the town. After Asteria won the award, her life didn't change much, as her fashion business was handled by her father. She only needed to draft her designs, so her life was still very comfortable. On the third day after arriving in the Chatterton town, Samuel Daly received a job posting for Asteria, which was an interview on a TV channel in Chatterton town. The designers were mostly behind the scenes, and Asteria had never shown up in public in the past few years. When she suddenly heard such news, she rejected it in her heart. However, when she saw her father's expectant eyes, she couldn't say anything to reject him. In the end, she just nodded and agreed. When they were on the show, the program director arranged a makeup artist for Asteria. Her skin was already very good, and she was not someone who would use makeup regularly. When she needed to attend some occasions, she only put on light makeup, and she would look very attractive instantly. Today, it was her first time putting on thick makeup, with thick foundation layer and heavily blushed cheeks. She could barely recognize herself. She even had the thought that these crew members were deliberately making her look like a clown to humiliate her. When she was recording the program, the host asked several questions about her work, such as her plans for her future work. However, the questions gradually went on to discuss her personal matters. Asteria smiled awkwardly and said, I'm not old yet, so I plan to work hard for a few years and master my own business. Then I'll consider other matters. The host said, Miss Asteria, you are so young and beautiful, and you got the Newcomers Award and the Best Fashion Design Award. In the future, the people who want to pursue you will definitely need to get in line. You don't have to be in a hurry, you can choose slowly. All of a sudden, Asteria was speechless. Asteria had never been to a TV show, and she didn't like being involved in other people's personal affairs. So when the host asked her about personal questions, she didn't want to answer. She did not answer, but the host did not intend to let her go. The host asked again, Asteria, what kind of man do you like? Is the appearance or personality more important? Is talent more important than wealth? The host asked several questions, but she never thought of those questions before, so she didn't know how to answer. Asteria did not answer, and the host was a little annoyed. She said, You are so beautiful and your career is successful. I guess your requirements must be very high. You should not be interested in ordinary people. Asteria said, I think fate is the most important thing. Meeting the right person is the most important part, and the others are not that important. The host said, Miss Asteria, do you mean that if you choose to be a couple, you won't mind his financial status? Don't you care about his status? Asteria raised her eyebrows slightly, feeling a little displeased. What did picking a partner have to do with the money? What did it have to do with status? Can't they just be in love with each other? She felt that the relationship was a matter between two people. As long as they liked each other, what did their status have to do with each other? However, there was a voice in the depths of her heart telling her that status will matter. But that voice in her heart was far too soft. She just let that go. The host got the hint and knew that Asteria was unwilling to cooperate with this topic, so she reluctantly changed the topic to Asteria's work. When it came to work, Asteria was willing to speak. She was very serious when discussing about designs, but the interviewer only asked a few superficial questions, and it seemed that she was not interested in her work. After the show ended, Asteria politely exchanged a few words with the host. The host was still very gentle, but when the camera was turned off, the host's face turned black. She looked at her with dissatisfaction, then turned around and left. As soon as Asteria returned to the locker room to remove her makeup, she heard some gossip. The so-called top designer, Asteria, is just a newcomer who just made a name for herself. She just got a promotion, but she has some ego issues. Yes. When Rosa asked her questions, she always ignored her. Who does she think she is? To be honest, new people come and go in the fashion design business. How long can she be famous? Who knows? I think she's just pretending to be pure and lofty. Maybe her private life is too bad for the public. That kind of person who always says that status does not matter, wear and tear. In fact, they won't consider dating anyone who's not rich. Several staff members chatted in the locker room freely. Their tone was extremely sour. Asteria didn't believe that they wouldn't know that she's nearby. It seemed that they deliberately provoked her. They wanted her to be furious and film a scene so that it will go viral and cause rumors. She was just a new designer. If such a rumor gets out, it would definitely hinder her future development. Asteria shook her head helplessly. She just didn't like to partake in empty discussions, but was being labeled as arrogant instead. It seemed that she'd better not come to this kind of program in the future. She just needed to do her job quietly. As long as her designs were fine, she wouldn't need to worry. Asteria removed her makeup and went out with her bag. As soon as she walked to the door, a group of people walked in from outside. "President Kevin, this way please." Hearing the voice, Asteria looked up and saw a tall man in a white shirt escorted by a group of people walking toward the broadcast hall. Those people's expressions and attitudes showed how respectful the man was. This kind of person must be the real big shot. There was no need to play with him at all. And those who talked behind her back were only brave because she was a nobody who had to carve her own path. Let's see if they could talk about this big shot behind his back. Asteria sighed and walked away. The group of men looked at her instantly. With only one glance from afar, Kevin Kyle reacted quickly. He stopped and turned around again. His sharp eyes fell on the woman who was about to leave. Over the years, he had seen countless people who were similar to Karen Daly. But every time he went closer to have a look, he would be disappointed. Chapter 198. If there was hope, there would also be countless disappointments. This time, Kevin Kyle did not immediately take action. Instead, he quietly watched the woman, who looked similar to Karen Daly, walking farther and farther away. Just as she turned around and disappeared from his sight, Kevin Kyle couldn't care less about anything else. He stepped out of the crowd and rushed out. Regardless if that was Karen Daly or not, he still needed to be sure. He would rather be disappointed again than let go of any chance to find her. Kevin Kyle ran away all of a sudden, and the others followed behind. "President Kevin." It was Nick Black who called him. After this job appointment, there was an important meeting waiting for him. "Don't come with me," Kevin Kyle said without looking back. As soon as he spoke, Nick Black stopped the group of people. He looked at Amelia Gray and could not do much. Kevin Kyle's legs were long, and he walked very fast. Soon he caught up with the woman. Today's weather was very good. After walking out of the TV station, she looked up at the sky, took a long breath, and smiled. Looking at her back, Kevin Kyle was so nervous that he swallowed hard. His Karen Daly liked to do these actions the most. Although she looked silly, she was so cute. He fixed his eyes on her and watched her take out a map from her backpack. She looked at it carefully for a while with her head down and then looked around. When she looked at him and saw that face clearly, Kevin Kyle froze instantly. It was the face that he had been thinking about constantly. It was the fact that he remembered so clearly. It was her. It was her. She was his wife, whom he had been thinking about day and night. It was his Karen Daly. Maybe his eyes were too shocked, or maybe he was the only one at the gate, so she also saw him. There were only a few steps between the two of them. As long as he took 2 steps, he could catch her and hold her in his arms as he used to do. He could feel her breath, heartbeat, and everything about her. However, Kevin Kyle stood where he was and couldn't move at all. His heart was beating so fast that it seemed that it was about to jump out of his chest. She walked over to him, pursed her lips and smiled politely at him, saying, "Sir, do you know which direction to the skyscraper tower?" Although she was a designer, she couldn't understand the map and was poor with directions. According to the map, the skyscraper tower was not far from here, and she would be able to get there in 10 minutes, but she just didn't know if she should go left or right. All of a sudden, Kevin Kyle heard her voice, which was so familiar to him, and it shocked him. He was confused, but he stretched out his hand to point to his right. "Thank you." After saying thank you, she smiled at him again and then stepped away. Her smile was still so sweet as if it could melt his heart. As long as he saw her smile, the haze in his heart would disappear in an instant with the wind. After she walked for some distance, Kevin Kyle followed her without hesitation, and he followed her for quite some time. Along the way, she would touch her surroundings, and Kevin Kyle would touch whatever she touched. This was his way of staying in touch with her. He did not dare to get too close to her, nor did he dare to catch her. He was afraid that as soon as he touched her, she would disappear in front of his eyes, as she did many times before. So he followed her from a distance and looked at her. Even if he had no contact with her, he felt inexplicably happy when he could follow her for such a long time. About 10 minutes later, they arrived at her destination, the skyscraper tower. The skyscraper tower used to be the landmark of the Chatterton town. Although Rovio Tower became the new landmark of Chatterton town, the hype of the skyscraper tower, a sightseeing spot, had not dissipated. Many tourists came to Chatterton town to visit the skyscraper tower. If they didn't travel to the skyscraper tower, they would be too embarrassed to say that they had been to Chatterton town. When Kevin Kyle saw her buying sightseeing tickets, he also followed her and wanted to buy tickets with her. The ticket price was $100, which was not a big deal for him at all. But he never took any cash with him, so when he had no assistance around, he couldn't afford it. "Are you going sightseeing?" You don't have any money with you? She stood next to him and asked him in her gentle and pleasant voice. Kevin Kyle looked at her and nodded stupidly. Yes. Please give me another ticket, she said to the ticket seller. She took out another $100 and bought a ticket for him. Thank you for showing me the way. Kevin Kyle looked at the ticket she handed over, but he didn't reach out to get it, as if he didn't dare to take it. Today, Karen Daly was so real, as if she really existed beside him. He wanted to get along with her for a while, but he didn't want to touch her. He was afraid that she would disappear from his eyes in an instant. He didn't reach out to take it, and she was a little embarrassed. She put the ticket on the counter and went to wait in line for the elevator. Kevin Kyle grabbed the ticket and also followed her, but he did not dare to get too close to her. There was still some distance between them. The people behind them bought tickets and lined up too. They saw that there were seats in between them and wanted to sit. Kevin Kyle glared at them coldly, and the people retreated back. The elevator could carry more than a dozen people at a time. As soon as the elevator door was opened, people were pushed into it. Kevin Kyle wanted to keep a distance from her, but he was pushed by someone and hit her. He stood next to her. There were more than a dozen people in the elevator, but he could only see her and only hear her. This Karen Daly was solid. She could breathe, and she could speak. He stopped other people from approaching her, and he kept a certain distance from her to protect her under his wing. Suddenly, someone accidentally pushed him, and his hand accidentally touched her hand. Her hand was cold, but the touch was so real. Wasn't this his dream? Or was it true that his Karen Daly really appeared beside him? He couldn't believe it. He wanted to hold her hand and confirm it again. But at this time, the elevator shook, and the lights in the elevator suddenly turned dark, and the ladder quickly fell down. Screams were heard one after another in the elevator. Ah, no, don't. Asteria let out a beast-like roar and trembled with fear. She held her hands up, forbidding anyone from approaching her. In the dark, Kevin Kyle grabbed her hands and held her in his arms, trying to calm her down and to stop her from being so scared. However, his hug made her even more resistant. She punched him again and again, almost heart-wrenchingly shouting, "Let me go! Don't touch me!" Chapter 199. The rapidly descending elevator suddenly stuck and did not continue to descend. The screams in the elevator also stopped instantly, but Karen Daly's fists did not stop. She seemed to be greatly frightened and regarded the person who held her as a fierce beast. Kevin Kyle hugged her tightly and kept comforting her. "Karen, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm here. It's okay. It's okay. I won't let anything happen to you again. Not anymore." 3 years ago, he had lost her, and he had always regretted it. Now that he met her again, no matter how much he had to pay, he would never let her get hurt again. No one could hurt her again. Kevin Kyle held Karen Daly tightly and ordered, "Who has a mobile phone? Please dial for emergency outside." Hearing his steady voice, the people trapped in the elevator seemed to calm down. No one made any noise. Some took out their mobile phones to light up the dark space, and some called for help. While in Kevin Kyle's arms, Karen Daly's body was still shivering. The light of the mobile phone shone on her delicate face, which made him see her pale face. What kind of things had she experienced in the past 3 years to make her react so violently when she encountered such a thing? However, it was not the best time to ask these questions. He had to find a way to stop her from being so scared. He had to wait until the rescue personnel rescued them safely first. If they followed the usual procedure, it would take at least half an hour for them to be rescued. So, Kevin Kyle took out his mobile phone to inform Nick Black and asked for his assistance. As soon as Nick Black received the news, he immediately informed people that Kevin Kyle was trapped in the elevator, and those in charge took action immediately. All the repair staff, firemen, police, and rescue personnel arrived at the scene in the shortest time possible. About 10 minutes later, they were rescued successfully. No one was injured, but everyone was shocked. After they were rescued, Nick Black and Amelia Gray, who had been waiting outside for a long time, ran over at the same time and asked worriedly, "President Kevin, do you have—" "Madam!" The words of concern turned into shock before they could speak, just because they saw the person around Kevin Kyle, the woman who was as gentle as a pool of spring water, the woman who had been searched for by Kevin Kyle for 3 years, and the woman who had been dead 3 years ago, now stood by Kevin Kyle's side. She was still beautiful, just like how she used to be. The two of them widened their eyes and opened their mouths wide. For a moment, they couldn't tell if it was a reality or a dream. Kevin Kyle glared at them in time and motioned for them to leave. Then he took his Karen Daly to the temporary ambulance and asked the doctor to do a simple routine check. Earlier, Nick Black called out for Madam. At that time, Asteria was still in a state of shock and did not hear it clearly. At this time, after a checkup, Asteria calmed down. Thinking of what she had just done in the elevator, she was very embarrassed and smiled apologetically at Kevin Kyle. "Sir, I'm sorry. I'm a little afraid of the elevator." She bit her lip and a faint blush appeared on her white face. Then she said, "I just overreacted and didn't hurt you, did I?" Her tone was polite and distant, with a mix of guilt and sincerity. However, her soft words were like a sharp sword piercing into Kevin Kyle's heart deeply. The joy of reunion was torn apart layer by layer, and he just realized that his Karen Daly didn't remember him. Kevin Kyle fixed his eyes on her and felt so confused. She did not remember him. There was no longer his existence in her memory, and their common memories had turned into bubbles. He did not speak. Asteria thought he was still paying attention to what had just happened and said, "Sir, I'm really sorry. Kevin Kyle saw her anxious and apologetic look, and he only felt that it was very dazzling. He couldn't help but move his head away. But he was afraid that his action would make her feel uncomfortable, so he quickly put a gentle smile on his lips and whispered, "Afraid of the elevator? Did something like this happen before?" His voice was very light and soft. It was clear that they had just met today, but he gave her a feeling that they had known each other for many years, and she felt inexplicably familiar with him. However, Asteria did not see Kevin Kyle's clenched hands on his side. His hands were so tensed up, as if they were resisting something with all their strength. Listening to his gentle voice and his kind eyes, she took a deep breath and said, "It's not a big deal." She smiled again. "Just a few years ago, I was trapped in the elevator in the hospital. I almost died that night." Asteria said calmly, but it was definitely traumatic. At that time, she had just recovered from a serious illness and just begun to walk slowly, but soon she was trapped in the elevator of the hospital. At that time, she tried hard to call for someone. The air in the enclosed space was thin, and the cold and hard walls around her seemed to collapse into her closer. She was curled up in a corner in a hospital gown. She only felt that the darkness was full of danger and despair. It seemed that she had returned to the time when she was in a coma. No matter how hard she ran in the darkness, she could not find a way out. She screamed, ran, screamed, and shouted, but the people she had been waiting for did not come. However, who was she waiting for? She didn't know. She had never mentioned to anyone about being trapped in the elevator. Because she was afraid that her father would worry about her, she did not even tell her father about it. But since then, she had been somewhat traumatized by the elevator. Today, there was an accident, and those dark memories came back. Therefore, she acted beyond her control. Fortunately, I have this man's help. Otherwise, I really don't know how to calm down. After thinking about it, Asteria wanted Kevin Kyle to throw a grateful smile on his face. She said it very calmly, as if there was nothing. However, Kevin Kyle knew that there probably was more than her words. If it had not been for the unforgettable fear, she would not react excessively earlier. In addition, she had always been this kind of person. Even if she was suffering, she would still smile through her problems and soothe everyone else. This smile was once a lie to him. He really wanted to hold her in his arms and comfort her. He wanted to tell her that he would not let her suffer any more grievances with him in the future. But he couldn't. He was afraid that his sudden action would frighten her, and he was afraid that she would regard him as a pervert who wanted to take advantage of her. After thinking for a long time, Kevin Kyle suppressed the heartache in his heart and pretended to be relaxed. "My name is Kevin Kyle. What about you?" "Asteria," he asked, and she answered. It was quick, without any hesitation, but he was lost for words. Chapter 200. Kevin Kyle hoped that she could say a few more words. He had a lot of things to say to her. He wanted to know how she had lived in the past 3 years. He wanted to tell her that little Karen was already 3 years old. She is cute, sensible, but sometimes she's a headache. But he couldn't say that to her right now. Or, he didn't know what to say. His wife, his Karen Daly, she could no longer remember their past. Asteria? Kevin Kyle repeated her name several times and said with a smile, "Asteria sounds very interesting. She's the goddess of the star night in Greek mythology. Presumably, your real name should be nice too." Suddenly, she heard someone ask for her real name again, and Asteria could not help but felt a little embarrassed. After a moment of hesitation, she said, 2 years ago, I was seriously ill and forgot everything about the past. My father didn't tell me my real name, but he called me Karen. Karen. The tip of her tongue was pressed against her lower lip and the corners of her lips were slightly raised. She could say these 2 words. It was simple but unforgettable. His Karen came back. This time, she really came back. It was not a dream for him to really appear beside her. "Well, thank you for today," she said. If she hadn't met him today, she wouldn't know how crazy she would be in the elevator. She might hurt innocent people, so she should thank him. "You bought me a sightseeing ticket. I should thank you first," he said. "You're welcome." She smiled shyly again. "If there's nothing else, I want to go home first. Do you need me to send you home?" He asked carefully. He is afraid that she would refuse his offer. She shook her head and said with a smile, "No, I'll take the subway home." "Then? Could you give me your contact number?" Kevin Kyle didn't say more. He was afraid that it would make her feel uncomfortable. Finally, he could only swallow back his words and nodded. "Be careful on the way." "Well, goodbye. See you." "Okay, goodbye." She turned around and left without hesitation. Looking at her figure getting further and further, Kevin Kyle didn't keep up with her. He just clenched his fists, restrained, and suppressed them. The person in front of him was clearly his wife and his child's mother. However, he was a stranger to her. Even the farewell that he just said was so polite. She definitely didn't mean to see him again. In the past, he had fantasized about all kinds of scenes when he met her again. He had thought that when he found her, he would hold her in his arms and never let go of her. He would be with her all the time. He had thought that when they meet again, she would happily throw herself into his arms and ask him if he missed her in her beautiful voice. He had fantasized about many scenes of reunion with her, but none of them was the same as what he had seen today. She had forgotten about him completely, forgotten their child, and forgotten their past completely. It was as if he had never left any traces in her life. Everything in the past was just a dream. After waking up from the dream, he was still alone. None of his family and friends could get close to him. If it weren't for little Karen, who accompanied him every day, calling him Daddy daily, even he would doubt if there was once a person like Karen Daly in his life. After Asteria left for some time, Kevin Kyle withdrew his reluctant eyes and waved to Nick Black. Send your best bodyguard to protect her 24 hours a day. Go to the TV station immediately. I want her contact information, and I want to know everything she has gone through in the past 3 years as soon as possible. On the way home, Asteria had been thinking about the man she met today. She felt that he looked familiar, but she couldn't remember where she had seen him. As she looked up at the TV screen in the subway, the media advertisement was introducing the world's most famous young entrepreneur, Kevin Kyle, who was the CEO of Rovio Corporation Inc., also known as Leo Kyle. Every photo of him was the same as what she saw today. He wore a white shirt, black trousers, and a pair of glasses with golden frames. He looked calm, yet restrained. The only difference was that he looked cold and noble in the photo, while in real life, he looked gentle and approachable, and seemed to be a little silly. After seeing this news, Asteria understood why it felt so familiar with him today. When she was in Milan, her father liked to watch news about this person, and she would occasionally see him on TV. Every time she saw the news about this man, it was about investment, or him being young and rich. She never thought that she would have something to do with him. When she was deep in her thoughts, she had already arrived at the destination. After getting off the car, Asteria took a deep breath, stretched a little, and forced a smile. She would hide the things she had encountered at the TV station today and the meeting with Rovio's CEO. And then she would work hard at the new job tomorrow. Now, she had a new starting point in her work. She had to work harder and draft better designs so that she could go further. When she got home, she smelled the fragrant aroma of dishes. When her father saw her coming back, he looked at her with a caring look and said worriedly, "Karen, where did you go after leaving the TV station? You are not familiar with Chatterton Town. I am very worried about you." "Dad, I just went out for shopping. In the future, if I want to live in this city, I have to get familiar with it first." She changed her shoes and walked to her father. "I'm no longer a child. I won't lose my way. Dad, don't worry." Samuel Daly sighed and said, "After your illness, you always forget things. I'm just worried that you'll lose yourself, and I won't be able to find you again." "Dad." Asteria suddenly couldn't say anything. He was already so old. At this age, she should be taking care of her father, but she had to make her father worry about everything. Before she went out, her father would definitely remind her that she should remember to eat and go home on time. If she didn't come back due to some delay, her father would definitely pick her up. For the past 2 or 3 years, it had been like this every day. Her father's hair was already turning white, but she was always like a child, making people worry about her. Samuel Daly turned around and handed the medicine on the table to her. He handed her a cup of water and said, "Eat the medicine first, and then eat dinner later." Asteria took the medicine and the glass of water, then she took her pill. She smiled at Samuel Daly and said, "Dad, don't worry about the medications in the future. I'll remember to take the medicine according to the instructions." Samuel Daly rubbed her head and said, "Silly, I am your father. How can I not be worried about you?" Asteria smiled and thought, "It's so nice to have such a father who takes care of me."